The Grand Egyptian Museum's opening date has been set for July 3rd, but will the gem officially actually open on July 3rd? In this video, I'm going to go over the announcement that was made regarding the gem's official date of opening on July 3rd, what I think is going to happen regarding the gem's opening, and more information about the Grand Egyptian Museum, like tickets, what you can currently see since the museum is about 60% open, and more information on Cairo's newest and biggest museum. If you're new to my channel, my name is Gus, and I started Egypt Adventures Travel because I am obsessed with Egypt. I lead group tours personally in Egypt and now also Jordan, and I also arrange lots of different types of private trips throughout Egypt and also now Jordan. You can head to my website and check out my upcoming group tours. I've got one coming up in May, I've got another one in November for Egypt and also Jordan. EgyptAdventureStravel.com has got all the information on me, my business, and my upcoming trips. Before diving into the video, there is a blog post linked in the video description below that has all of the links and information that I'm talking about in this YouTube video. So if you want to go directly to read the interview with the GEM CEO talking about the July 3rd opening, if you want to read more information about the GEM, if you want to see the links and references I bring up in this video, go to the video description and open up that blog post so you can follow along. Now let's talk about the Grand Egyptian Museum's official opening date of July 3rd, the announcement that was made sharing that date, and what I think is going to happen regarding the GEM's official opening. The CEO of the Grand Egyptian Museum, Ahmed Ghanim, went on an Egyptian talk show on 28th of January 2025, and he shared information about the Grand Egyptian Museum, and he said that the opening date is going to be on July 3rd, 2025. This wasn't a super official announcement with a press release and press conferences. It was the CEO of the Grand Egyptian Museum going on a popular Egyptian talk show. I've got the link in the blog post that's in the video description if you want to practice your Egyptian Arabic and listen to the interview. So that was the CEO of the GEM, Ahmed Ghanim, saying that the Grand Egyptian Museum will have its official opening on July 3rd. Other than that, we don't have any other information on the official opening date. There's nothing posted on the Grand Egyptian Museum's official website, but Mr. Ghanim shared on the talk show that the Grand Egyptian Museum's opening is going to be a huge event with celebrations lasting days, weeks, or even months, is what he was saying. And the one thing we do know is that they've tapped a local production company, the same company that produced the really successful events, the Golden Parade that brought the mummified remains of 22 royal pharaohs from the Egyptian Museum in Tahrir Square to the National Museum of Egyptian Civilization, and also the company that produced the parade that opened up the Avenue of the Sphinxes in Luxor. So he shared that the Grand Egyptian Museum will open on July 3rd, that it's going to be managed by this production company. But other than that, we don't have any other information about Egypt's largest museum's official opening. Shortly after this announcement on the Egyptian talk show, a few news outlets like Ahram and Egypt Today picked up the story and wrote that the Grand Egyptian Museum is going to be open on July 3rd, but there have been no other press releases or anything official released from the GEM regarding the opening, and the GEM's official website still doesn't have an opening date set. So this is a good segue into what I think is going to happen regarding the museum's opening. Now, the Grand Egyptian Museum, it's already about 60% open. The 12 main galleries are open, the Great Hall is open, the retail space is open, the Grand Staircase is open. You can watch a YouTube video I made going over all of these areas and sharing everything you can see at the GEM. So the main areas that still need to be opened are the King Tut galleries, the galleries for the Pharaoh Tutankhamun, and the Solar Boat Museum. The King Tut galleries are almost ready to go. They just need to move several key pieces from the Egyptian Museum, the old or the original Egyptian Museum in Tahrir Square in downtown Cairo, to the Grand Egyptian Museum. Currently still on display at the old Egyptian Museum are Tutankhamun's golden funerary mask, his golden sarcophagus, his throne, and dozens of other objects. Now, those objects at one point are going to be moved over to the Grand Egyptian Museum, and then they're going to join the thousands of other artifacts that were found in King Tut's tomb that are already in their display cases and ready to go at the Tut exhibit at the GEM. So before the Grand Egyptian Museum can have its official opening, we're going to need to see an announcement about those artifacts being moved, the final King Tut artifacts from the Egyptian Museum, over to the Grand Egyptian Museum. An opening date of July 3rd makes sense for this because I think that Egypt's going to take the low tourist season. The summertime is the time where there's hardly any tourists visiting Egypt. And they're going to use that to take those King Tut objects off display and then to move them. Because this is going to take several days, maybe a couple of weeks. And I know that Egypt doesn't want to take its most prized possessions off of display for tourists in the height of the winter time, in the spring, the high season. So I think it makes sense that they'll do this over the summer, move the King Tut artifacts over to the Grand Egyptian Museum, install those remaining artifacts, and then open up the King Tut exhibit along with the official opening of the museum. And Khufu's Solar Boat Museum is the last thing that needs to be opened aside from the King Tut galleries. This museum was built to house the gigantic boat that was discovered in over 1,000 pieces buried next to the largest pyramid on the Giza Plateau. The boat was on display at the Giza Plateau for many years, but they moved the boat over to the Grand Egyptian Museum, and they've built a structure outside the main hall of the museum to house Khufu's solar boat. So when this opens and when the King Tut galleries open, that's when we're going to see the official opening of the gem happen. So as for the gem CEO Ahmed Ghanim's announcement of a July 3rd opening, who knows what's going to happen with the Grand Egyptian Museum. There have been announcements of openings and plans that have been happening for years, and a lot of them haven't come to fruition. This is the first time, though, that somebody's put an official date down that they say July 3rd, because in the past, all of the openings for the gem have been vague. Like, oh, it's going to open in 2024, it's going to open in the fall, it'll open in November. So somebody saying on air, this is opening on July 3rd, that's the first time that we have an official date set for the opening. Now, that date hasn't appeared anywhere else aside from that talk show interview, and then it's been reiterated in some media coverage of that interview, but this is the first time we have an official date set for the opening. And I feel like the gem could be ready to open on July 3rd. I've been visiting the gem with my tour groups over the last several months because it's been open for a while, and they opened up the 12 main galleries back in October. So back in October, there have already been thousands of artifacts at the museum that have been open and on display for the public. I think that if Egypt can move over those King Tut artifacts from the original museum over to the gem, those few remaining artifacts, because most of them are already ready to go at the Grand Egyptian Museum, and then if they can get Khufu's Solar Boat Museum ready, then a July 3rd opening is plausible. However, I have learned over the last several years in regards to the Grand Egyptian Museum, we can't trust any announcements about opening dates or information about the museum's full opening because we have been told time and time again that the museum is going to open, that they're going to have the official opening, the full opening, and then all of those announcements have not come to fruition. So my attitude regarding the gem is that if the gem is a must for anyone's visit to Egypt, the full opening, because right now it's already 60% open, but if the full opening is a must for your trip to Egypt, wait until after the gem's been fully open. I've been inside, I've done a YouTube video confirming everything's open until you start planning your trip to Egypt in order to see the Grand Egyptian Museum. That way, if July 3rd comes and goes and we don't have the official opening yet, nobody's disappointed with planning a trip to Egypt and then having to cancel or to reschedule because the gem opening didn't happen as it was announced, like what's happened previously. And then who knows, something unexpected might happen. When the Grand Egyptian Museum opened all 12 of its main galleries back in October, we had only a few days notice that this was going to happen. They did a press conference a couple of days before, and then all of a sudden the galleries were opened. I happened to be in Egypt at the time, so I was able to go and do a live stream at the museum that same exact day. But that was just by chance. We had very little warning. All of a sudden, they opened up those 12 galleries, and we only knew that that would happen a few days before. So the Grand Egyptian Museum has set a precedent of being unpredictable in regards to what the plan is going to be for the official opening. So we might have something unexpected come up in the future. So mark your calendars for July 3rd, the official opening date of the Grand Egyptian Museum, and we'll see if that comes to fruition. Now, here are some other frequently asked questions I get about the Grand Egyptian Museum, starting with the Grand Egyptian Museum's official website. The GEM's official website is www.visit-gem.com, and this is the main source of information and tickets on the Grand Egyptian Museum. However, they haven't put the updated opening date on the website yet, so we'll see if that happens sometime in the future. The website is where you can book tickets for general self-guided tours. You can also book guided tour tickets where they have an Egyptologist from the GEM leading a large group of travelers around the museum. You can also email the Grand Egyptian Museum from their website to set up a private tour. There's additional tickets available, like for the Children's Museum or for a scavenger hunt. That's good for kids of all ages. So the Grand Egyptian Museum's official website is where you can go to get more information on the museum and to buy tickets. But you also don't have to buy tickets at the online website. You can buy tickets at the Grand Egyptian Museum itself. They don't have time tickets, or they're not running out of tickets. So really the only reason you need to book a ticket online in advance is because if you just really want to do it online ahead of time, or if you want to book one of those group tours or set up a private tour. Another question I'm asked all the time is if somebody can only visit one museum in Cairo, which one should they visit? The Grand Egyptian Museum or the Old Egyptian Museum in downtown Cairo? So the answer to that question, it really depends on what a traveler wants to experience. Right now, the Old Egyptian Museum in Tahrir Square in downtown Cairo is my top choice for those who want to see the most important ancient Egyptian artifacts. The Old Museum still houses many of the important King Tut artifacts, like his golden funerary mask, the #1 most important piece of ancient Egyptian art. Also Tut's throne, his golden sarcophagus, and lots of other artifacts that were discovered in his tomb. At some point, those will move over to the Grand Egyptian Museum, and subscribe to my YouTube channel. I will make a video as soon as that happens. But for now, all of those artifacts are still on display at the Old Museum, some of the most important ones from King Tut. They've moved over many to the GEM, but that's not on display. You can't go see those. But at the Old Museum, they still have Tut artifacts that are on display. They also have a lot of masterwork pieces of Egyptian statuary at the original Egyptian Museum. You can see a statue of the pharaoh who built the Saqqara Step Pyramid. The only statue that remains, it's tiny, but the only one that remains for Pharaoh Khufu, who built the Great Pyramid. There are just some amazing pieces of art at the Old Egyptian Museum, like the Narmer Palette, our first ever depiction of an ancient Egyptian pharaoh. So I recommend the Old Egyptian Museum for somebody who wants a more classic museum feel with some of the most important artifacts of ancient Egypt. For the Grand Egyptian Museum, I recommend that for somebody who wants to see a modern museum with well-labeled displays. It's easy to do a self-guided tour. There are thousands of artifacts inside. They might not be historically as significant at the Old Egyptian Museum, but the GEM has a lot of colossal statues as well. So if travelers want to see gigantic statues like the gargantuan statue of Ramses the Great, the Grand Egyptian Museum is the place to go. I also love that the Grand Egyptian Museum has restaurants and cafes right there on site that are higher quality than the vendors that are at the Old Egyptian Museum. So you can sightsee at the GEM, take a break and have lunch at Zuba, an amazing restaurant for Egyptian street food, or grab a coffee at 30 North, a local Egyptian branch. And then you can go back to sightseeing. So the Grand Egyptian Museum, I'd say, is more for travelers who want to do a more modern museum, self-guided tour with everything labeled and well laid out, and then people who want to see really colossal pieces of statuary. The Great Hall and the Grand Staircase have amazing examples of pharaonic statues and artifacts taken from ancient Egyptian temples that are on a scale that they don't have at the Old Egyptian Museum. Then, of course, there's the National Museum of Egyptian Civilization. I would say this museum would not be my choice if somebody can only go to one museum, because the main highlight here are the 22 royal mummies that were moved from the Old Museum to the National Museum. So if you really want to see mummified remains, the Nimic or the National Museum of Egyptian Civilization should be where you go. But other than that, there's not much of interest at this museum that you wouldn't already get at the Egyptian Museum or the GEM. Another question I'm asked about the GEM is how to get there and whether you need to go with a tour guide and a tour or whether you can do the GEM independently. Since the Grand Egyptian Museum is in an area that's under a lot of construction at the moment because of the museum itself, developments they're doing at the Giza Plateau, and also the Cairo Metro, they're going to be opening up a metro station underneath the GEM. So the area is under a lot of construction. I highly recommend taking either Uber or having a private driver take you to the museum. It doesn't really make sense at this point to take public transportation. You'd have to be walking for about 20 minutes across a busy highway. Crossing the street in Egypt is a challenge even on a normal street, let alone like a 5-6 lane highway. So I recommend taking Uber. It can drop you off directly outside the museum's gate, or taking a private transfer, of course. Travelers can visit the Grand Egyptian Museum without a tour guide. Unlike the Old Egyptian Museum, which you really need a guide for in order to understand what's going on, since most of the objects are not labeled and you can't really walk through and know what something is. At the Gem, though, everything is clearly labeled, and they have a flow and they have a system for the layout in the galleries. So you wouldn't need a private guide in order to experience the Gem. You can definitely do a self-guided tour and have a good experience. The Grand Egyptian Museum also has those group tours, so just for a few hundred extra Egyptian pounds more, just a few US dollars more, you can take a tour and see the highlights with an Egyptologist who's on staff at the museum. You're going to be in a group, though, that's pretty large. I've seen groups of upwards of 30 or 40 people with these guides, so that might not be the best experience for folks who want to have a more personalized or more go at your own pace style tour. But you can always do the tour with the tour guide from the Gem, see the highlights of the museum, and then go back, circle back on your own and read more and learn more by yourself. So that's the update on the Grand Egyptian Museum and the July 3rd opening. So the question just remains is, will the Gem actually open on July 3rd? Who knows, but let's mark our calendars and wait and see what happens. What questions do you have about the Grand Egyptian Museum or about travel to Egypt in general? Write a comment on this video. I love getting comments from my viewers and answering their questions on the video. And reach out to me anytime if you want to help plan your trip to Egypt. I'm Gus with Egypt Adventures Travel, and I'll see you on the next video.